Ukraine's military says it destroyed almost 70 aerial targets launched by Russia in its latest onslaught overnight. And that includes more than 36 cruise missiles, as well as Iranian-made drones and a reconnaissance drone. A police official in Kyiv says residential buildings and infrastructure in several districts were damaged, but no one was killed or injured. This comes just a day after Ukraine said Russia had launched one of its largest drone attacks to date against Kyiv. Sina Salma Abdelaziz is in London with the very latest for you. Salma, hi. Russia ramping up missile and drone strikes targeting the Ukrainian capital just as crowds were marking Kyiv Day.
Yes, so yet again overnight there was a huge assault by Russia on Ukraine. As you mentioned, some 67 air targets shot down according to Ukrainian officials, 37 cruise missiles and 29 drones were destroyed. Ukrainian officials say that this latest assault was targeting military facilities and critical infrastructure, and it comes, as you mentioned, just a day after, on Sunday, Ukraine saw the largest assault since the conflict began by drones. Some 59 drones were shot at Ukraine on Sunday. All but one were shot down. So there's a couple of things to take away from this news, from this information. As you mentioned, it appears that Russia is ramping up its attacks far from the front lines. Of course, this serves to terrorize the citizens of Ukraine who are, again, not on that battlefield, but it also expends Ukraine's very valuable munitions. When you think about the Shahid drones in particular, these are very low cost. They cost about 20 times less than the missiles required to take them out. So it's a way of forcing Ukraine to expend very valuable resources. But for Ukrainian officials, what they take away from this is that their air defense systems are working, is that those weapons that help, that poured in from NATO and its allies, those are effective. Those are saving lives. If you take again the example of the air assault today, so far, no reports of casualties. That means they're able to be effective in taking out, again, these huge barrages that are being fired by Russia.
And Salma, what more have you been able to learn about this series of explosions that have happened in and around the Russian-occupied cities of Berdyansk and Mariupol?
So both Ukrainian-backed officials and Russian-backed officials giving indications that the cities of Mariupol and Berdyansk were sites of explosions over the course of the last day. What we understand, and again, it's great for you to pull up the map there because these are two very important cities, critical cities on the Sea of Azov. Mariupol in particular, of course, has become emblematic to Ukrainians of the brutality of Russian forces after it was taken in a months-long siege last year at the beginning of the conflict. It is very much Russian occupied. So is Berdyansk right now. Ukrainian-backed officials there saying that they were targeting sites for the Russian military in both those locations. At least 5 sites were targeted in Berdyansk. Another site was targeted in Mariupol. Russian officials did indicate that their air defense systems were activated. What does all of this mean? It means potentially that we're looking at Ukrainian forces conducting what they call shaping operations, so taking out critical infrastructure, critical Russian positions ahead of this counteroffensive again, Laila.
Salma Abdelaziz reporting. Thank you for your continued coverage.
So that sound, and there you can see as it lights up, those images of Ukrainian forces repelling an intense barrage of Russian drone attacks. Ukraine's military says its forces shot down nearly 70 drones that were targeting Kyiv. It's being called Russia's largest attack to date on the capital city, using Iranian-made drones, notably. And it comes as CNN teams on the ground heard several explosions in Kyiv overnight. Now, these Russian attacks also come as Ukraine nears the launch of this long-awaited counteroffensive we've been talking about. One of Ukraine's top generals recently posted this highly produced video. It shows Ukrainian troops preparing for battle and ends with troops chanting a message that calls for victory for a decisive offensive. Joining us now with more, retired U.S. Army Major Mike Lyons. Good to see you as always. So when we talk about this, What would this potential counteroffensive at this point, what would it look like?
Yeah, just look at a map. You can see Russian forces in two separate locations. I believe any counteroffensive is going to cut these Russian forces in half here and threaten Crimea. I think that is the issue here for the Ukrainian forces, but they're not going to do that until they have the combined arms, the shock effect, the tanks, helicopters, Bradley fighting vehicles, more men, more equipment. Russia still has had setbacks, lost a lot of men, low morale, but they're still Russia. They could go on the active defense, and they still are a very formidable opponent.
They certainly have time on their side. They can wait it out a bit longer. Right. In terms of the counteroffensive and weather plays a critical role in when we start to see that offensive. Explain to us how weather plays into all of this.
Yeah, so weather and terrain, it's part of a commander's assessment with regard to the tactical situation on the ground. On a ground war, though, not like D-Day, for example, when weather really impacted the seas and the like, I think what you're going to see here, the soil, there's concern that, for example, satellite images show that the soil is hardening up. It's a little better. That will provide, again, those tanks a little more mobility on the ground there. The Ukraine military has the advantage. It's a home. They know the terrain. They know where the bridges are. They know where things are going. But I think it's still a small effect. I think the combat forces are really more important.
I see.
So give us a sense of timing. I feel that we've been talking about this for a long time, this potential counteroffensive. Are we approaching the right moment?
Yeah, you go back to that, and you have to say that, again, they're not going to put their troops in a situation where they're going to fail. They need to succeed. They do pick the time, they pick the place and location. I'm not sure they have enough troops ready to go. We haven't seen, for example, reports of massing of equipment in the areas in the south. We hear a lot of reports about what's going on in this part here in Bakhmut in the west. But again, from my perspective, from a military perspective, I think this is where the counteroffensive takes place, and we don't have that equipment there yet. It's not ready to go.
Any sense of when it might be? Because, I mean, the spring offensive, I think, strategically is really important for Ukraine to be able to show that they can do this.
Well, I think, let's give it another 90 days and assess the situation there. You still have these crews, for example, some of the weapon systems, for example, the tanks, the Leopard, the Abrams. These are the things that are going to make a difference. These are the shock effect that will make a difference on the ground. And they're just not, they're training troops in Grafenwehr. They have troops in the United States still. The Patriot missiles have been effective. The way Ukraine wins is a combined arms fight. And synchronizing all these troops, that takes time.